I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Again, good evening. We have building committee here, admin, the board, a few online. I will take a motion to approve the agenda. So moved. I do see second.
Second.
Second by Bob. I'll do a roll call. All those in favor, Maura? John?
Aye.
Bob?
Aye.
Jason?
Aye.
Sorry, I'm here. Maura, I'm sorry, I'm driving.
You good? Lucy? Aye. Lindsay? Aye.
Jamie, aye.
Motion passes. Number 3, joint work session with the building committee. A, discussion of facility planning designs for the operation of 3 schools in RSD 13. I'll hand it over to Kim first to explain a little bit of the paperwork, and then we'll move on from there.
So I went through and I just handed out, I don't usually hand out hard copies, but we had a kind of a change or an update to our one from the 13th. When we met on the 13th, some of the questions were about expanding that second floor, how it was smaller. So Rusty and Carson went in and did that, and they call that C1, C2, C3 now. So, but the price did change for C1 because there's more square footage, which I'll let them speak to, but that's why you have 2. So the one that's marked the 13th, you'll see BOE meeting March 13th has the 10 million on the C1. That was the original cost that we talked about. The one dated March 20th is the one for tonight, which includes the C1A options, and that cost increased to 12 on that if you expand that second floor. So sorry for having the 2 presentations, but I thought because 10 option C1 is still an option, you'd want to see C1A. 2 and 3 options, C2 and 3 remain the same. So it's only a C1 option, and it's making that upper level larger.
And if I could just say what I say every day, just to reinforce, going for C1 versus C1A is not committing the district to a specific design. It's simply changing the dollar amounts to reflect what some people asked for last week. We appreciate you guys making that update, because it would add square footage to make that second floor complete in that design concept.
So I think is the format of tonight to be just to kind of ask some questions, and then if Rusty and Carson have to go to specific slides, they can do that to explain.
Yeah, I know we had a change just visually. We already discussed this with C1 and C1A, but if you guys, Rusty, if you want to quickly go through those, just so we have something before we get to discussion on them, because when I went through them, some of the C2A, I can just looking at it, so might be beneficial.
So the main difference in C1 and C1A was a comment was made that should we go a full 2-story on the first floor and the second floor in the same footprint. And that was a good comment in terms of, making the site more compact, not using as much site space. But in that discussion, then we said, well, if that's the case, let's add additional notches to get us to the maximum allowable square footage, so without having an impact on our reimbursement rate. So that's what we did, is to expand that. And really, as I mentioned previously, we had a smaller second floor because we were trying to meet just the cost and count. By adding that square footage, we moved 3rd grade, so it's 3rd, 4th, and 5th on the second floor. And what that allows us to do is actually provide a little bit more space for special education spaces on the lower level. So that's what C1A is depicting. The layout is identical. It actually provides a little bit more room where the pre-K drop-off is. So, it helps the site to some degree, but it does increase by a little over 3,000 square feet. The square footage of the building, which then results in the additional cost that you see, and that's hence the delta. Of course, it's reimbursable square footage, so that true delta is really the net cost that's being included in that other slide. So that was one change that we made. The second change for C2 was I should buy part. Yeah,
How many additional square feet is it?
about 3,700 square feet.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And still be within the standards, yes.
It's still within the reimbursable rate standards, okay.
And that's primarily because we get a 20% bonus on all the pre-1959 construction.
Yeah, and I don't want to lose sight too. The reason we talked about that last meeting is, in my mind, you always want to design and put your bid or estimate together based on the maximum allowable square footage, based on the size requirements. Because again, what most people don't understand is the space standards nowadays are much tighter than they were years ago. And so you want to design to that maximum standard. And as Bob said before, Q&A, they're putting a concept together based on their design, based on input, what space the staff needed. That is something that can drastically change, one, between now and the actual construction date. And it also can vary from architect, engineering outfit to another. So in my eyes, you always want to design to the maximum allowable square footage. And the last point is, remember that this is based on projections of X number of years ahead. It's a guess. We don't really know. I like to build a building to the maximum square footage. It gives you that built-in flexibility. It gives you the most bang for your buck, and we're still in the reimbursement.
I think it also makes it a slightly easier sell too, knowing that there is some flexible space and we're not building ourselves into a corner with this design. And, you know, if there is the need for expansion in the future, we've already built it in. So I just think it's everything for that dollar value, that extra square footage is really a good value. Thank you, Rusty.
Yeah, one of the things I should say, even though it's currently represented as additional rooms, but it could also end up being that some of the existing rooms expand. There's slightly more square footage, especially in the pre-K, K1 areas, so that there's a little bit more square footage there, because the need is typically, you know, they have more things and areas to go to, and there's the bathrooms and the storage and so on. So it gives us a little bit more flexibility there. So the next option was the new building option, which it was a great comment about the kindergarten classrooms being in the front. So we did swap the two, and that's what C2A is all about, is you move the cafeteria to the front of the building. So all the main assembly spaces, like the cafeteria, the gym, and the media center, are all towards the front. We still achieve the fact that music can serve as the sort of the pre-function space for the stage, and actually keeps it, you know, so that while the cafeteria is being used as the seating area, the stage is still there with access to the music space and behind it. And then we had a similar footprint in both cases, so the change brought the service to the front and allowed us to, as you can see on the site plan, still provide a separate pre-K drop-off area, which takes some of the traffic out of the front of the building. And that was the main change that was discussed and that we are depicting in this sketch. And then the third slide, Jane, there might be any questions on that one?
That's a much cleaner, that's also a much cleaner design, I think, this way.
Yep. So then the only other change, there was no change in C3. And so the final change was only in the slide for the comparison of the projects, in which case the numbers, there's no change in the number for C2 or C3. Because we just relocated certain functions. But the first column, which is in this case C1A, is the number that we were saying. So the price went up. So it went up to 76,130,000. And so the net cost went up to 12,427,984. I will say that in discussions today, I learned that there is a new regulation that's been approved on EVs on school sites. And they're looking for 20% of your parking count to be EV, which is a significant number because that means you're building EV charging stations for 20% of your parking spaces. As of 2023, July 1st. And it affects schools and public buildings.
It's part of the requirement under the reimbursement rate.
Can't you get a waiver of the full build out of them if you put the conduits and bases in?
I think you used to.
This is a new regulation and we have to check on this because they're providing 4 EVs on another project that we're designing right now. And the committee was debating, should we go up to 6 or 8 or 10? And then in the process, wait a minute, does this apply to this project? And that's well under documentation, but luckily we missed the cutoff by 2 days. So as a result, we did say that July 1st, 2023, this law took effect.
Can we seek other grants to pay for this as well?
Eversource does provide a lot of incentives on that, but it's got some maximum amounts that they will give you, which will
There
exceed.
could be some leeway based on the current legislation that could go into effect July 1 too. So there's some stuff that we really don't know until July 1 comes out.
Yeah, they often bring out these mandates and then they get feedback that, there's no money.
Roll it back.
Or that it rolled out too fast. I think the legislation really, even last week, was saying that they needed to reconsider and really roll back some of that. So
This
I
just
think that
pertains
full
to
time.
new construction?
it pertains to EV in general.
Every
$2 million
parking lot now needs 20% coming up at some point.
Is it 20% of total or 20% of?
20% of the total.
Yeah, that's
It's
not.
passed yet, or is it just
Space.
spoken about?
That's crazy.
It's passed, but.
I didn't hear a
there could
word
be
about
some-
this in the
there
news.
could
You
be
think
some
that would
relief
be
in it in
because
this
that
coming-
affects every community.
And it's an
in the state.
unfunded mandate.
Oh, they're saying you're
That's
getting.
parking
funded by the
spots, right?
state.
It's
Yeah, but
parking
it's taking
spots,
away
it's
from
not,
charge,
it's not,
which
you have to have
costs
a
the
charger
district.
each spot, you could have one
20%
charger,
of them.
Essentially.
but you could have one charger.
Have to
You have to have the charger fully wired. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's
Operable.
20%. You gotta have a lot of chargers.
How many?
So we
parking
should
spots are there?
minimize the amount of parking spaces we originally planned.
But unfortunately, they got you to catch 22.
But then we'll have to have a yellow brick road running from
Well,
the sidewalk to.
Can we run the next session?
We should have informal overflow parking.
Yeah.
I suspect there'll be, because there's a lot of, I'm going through it right now.
Right.
And there's a lot on it, who's responsible for maintaining it, who's responsible for the power, all that stuff. I don't think it's been sorted. I suspect you're right, Lindsay, that there'll be some period of time where they'll put a moratorium for another year or whatever until they sort out these details.
There's also a function of, can we shut it off after hours? Because
Oh my God,
otherwise
yeah.
everybody's coming and plugging in and. who's
And we
paying for
really
that?
don't want
Yeah.
that. But Darren raises a good point too. Can we just do reinforced turf for overflow? I mean, there's no reason to pave overflow if it's only going to be used for sporting events or weekend activities. Could we do a giant reinforced turf area?
And
for the
that might
overflow
be an option that you look at as long as zoning allows you to do that. So that you design primarily for the daily use.
Yeah.
And then have the overflow parking.
We can figure this out.
Yeah, I
Just
think.
one thing. So we have some feedback that we're not hearing what everyone's saying because we're talking over each other. So if we could just wait till someone ends.
And can't do anything about it anyway. It's gonna be required, it's required, right? So
At this point, yes, it's just a function that I had to bring it up because the impact budget wise, I mean, if you're adding so many EV stations, it also affects even the size of your switchgear and service coming into your building. So there's trickle down impact as well.
We have some solar power on that building.
I was just gonna,
More room for it.
I was gonna say, you're gonna put in solar carports afterwards to be able to.
I think we can talk
Covered.
about it till the end of the
Yeah.
day, but we
Yeah.
should anticipate that we have to do this and we should keep up on this and make sure that we're double checking but at this point, like, that's all we really can do is prepare that we might have to do this,
The only reason I'm bringing it up is a budget impact too.
right?
And I don't want to say this includes all those and it doesn't.
I think if we do settle on a number and we move forward with a couple other, whether we're doing estimates or whatever, that we should definitely show as a separate line item and capture all of the cost, switchgear upgrades, all that stuff should be shown somewhere so that we can track it. In case we do have some changes.
Cost to meet mandate XXX, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I have a question on the cost. I see the cost increased. Is that just a function of having more square footage or?
That's correct.
Okay, well, if that's the case, I don't understand why the cost per square foot was lower under option C1 versus C1A. Because we're making a more efficient building by building out the second floor and having less footprint. I would think intuitively that the cost per square foot should go down.
The level of estimating that we're doing at this point is just a per square foot. It's not a detail that says, okay, we're gonna save so much for the foundation and so on. The cost really is very negligible. The difference would be, there are some savings in the overall, but it's to try and separate that, it's not worth the number at this point.
So I guess the point to be made is that there really is not a discernible difference between the cost of C1 and C1A.
Well, I mean, other than the fact that you are, because you're fitting out all that additional square footage, but yeah, the net cost is fairly small.
Other than we're getting more square footage.
Yeah.
But we're really creating a more efficient building.
You are, and you're also, taking full advantage of your reimbursement rate.
We want to go through the financials on each one, because I know there was a significant change. I know we touched on it back and forth, but looking at what Darren just said and looking at C1 versus C1A, we're only, the difference between 10 million.
1.4. 1,451,700. That's the difference between the two, the net. When you're out there. Well, I mean, that's what we have right now.
My only issue looking at C1A is it puts second grade like in their own little island. How that's an opinion on that, or does it really matter because we can move all of them around if we need be? And it's just-
That's on the broken record on that, but yes, I think the decision is, to John's point, like, do you want to go for more square footage and kind of plan for more flexibility moving forward at the cost that Lucy just mentioned, or do we want to be a little bit more conservative financially? If that's the option we're even going for, I mean, it sounds to me like people are leaning towards one of those two, but
When we first, before we go through different subsets of each one, do we want to eliminate either C2 or C3?
I'll make that motion.
What would you
On
like to
which?
eliminate?
C2 and C3.
We have a consensus or any concerns about removing C2 or C3?
From a building committee perspective, Darren, do you have a preference? We have a response from Nick as to, his general preference.
I'll give you mine, and then, I think from my perspective, this C1 option, C1A actually is what I would recommend to any committee that I was involved with in Board of Ed. With the caveat that I would only recommend that based on the fact that the existing building, again, is in decent shape structurally and it's something that is rebuildable. And this, that is the case here. While me as a construction person, I would love nothing more to do than go in and tear a site down and build brand new. That's a great option. That's, I was actually doing the job, love to do it that way. But in this particular case, I strongly would recommend the C1A option. I think it gives you the best bang for the buck. The building, the existing building there is rebuildable. The site general layout is pretty good. And, you know, it sort of checks all the boxes that you really need there. And all in all, I think it'll look great regardless. So that's my opinion. And I think several other building committee members were similar.
Darren, John?
I'd agree with that.
So I'll add to it. And the C2 and C3 options, I look at it simply, is there an overriding benefit to these options that would warrant the additional cost? And I don't see it. So I don't see anything, unless somebody else has an opinion, to say that those have overwhelming additional value over C1A for the cost.
Yeah, in fact, I think
I would go with C1A.
building on a new site is a detriment to my mind, so
I
citing
agree.
actually.
I agree with John, and Darren and John. The best location for the site is where the building is, and the plans developed by the architects show that the site can be effectively reused. So I would recommend eliminating C2 and C3, and honestly, in favor of C1A as opposed to C1, because I think once it comes down to construction, the cost difference from a contractor perspective is going to be almost negligible.
And I think also the C1A option, and I'm not an architect, but it appears to me that there's more option for expansion of the building in the future under that scenario than C1.
Yeah, that was my whole point too. And I think because we're gonna have a lot of concerns from the public just talking about the elimination of both elementary schools, you know, can we deal with that expansion now? Can we deal with it forward if the enrollment increases? I think it gives us the most to be able to have that confidence in comparison to the money. I think that well-being and peace in the community is going to be worth that amount with that and that.
I would recommend in terms of layout, though, laying it out in the C1 configuration, but keeping that space available so that we're not redoing everything if enrollment increases, and having some flexibility there, so we're not undoing everything that we redid.
Right, I think that being clear that, because I think that was my hesitancy to see that second grade there, like knowing that we can move these around so that they're not in these silos, these by themselves, I think. That's my only reservation on C1A, and then would the amount of money difference between C1 and C1A be worth it to the community? I think it's definitely worth it to us. I think it's worth it to the community.
But I think the configuration of C1 right now makes sense, just keeping that space as flexible space as needed.
Right, I agree.
I mean, you could always look at it as well, too, that the upperclassmen might want this separation too. You could always put the fifth grade. Five's good over there. Yeah. So I mean, the C1A gives you a lot of options to just configure it however you want.
The issue I see with C1A is it really doesn't give you that flex space. Yeah, you do have rooms like the multi-purpose room over in the second grade wing. But once again, there's no dividers or anything. So if you do need another classroom, you're cutting into other stuff. Versus.
Not if we move it.
Yeah, that's why I would keep that C1 configuration in the C1A footprint.
Absolutely, that's why I would agree with you.
Yeah, just leave it as big space for the fifth and fourth graders, get a really big rumpus room for a couple years until something else comes along.
When I think too, in a new building too, it might be nice to have spaces to spread out in the start of this, where they can really concentrate on their teams in the building and.
Yeah. No, I think it's great. Like I said, I think you've done a great job on laying all this out for us.
Yeah,
So-
and I think coming back with what you've come back with has really alleviated a lot of the concerns that we've had, so I really appreciate that.
So did John have a motion?
I don't know what it was, but
It was something.
yeah, to eliminate.
So
We didn't schedule a vote. This is a regular meeting, but my thought
With recommendations.
for consideration is that we would schedule a vote for the meeting on April 3rd. Is that the next regular meeting? I don't.
We have one the same day as the hearing. Yeah.
unless we think that's too late. I don't think it is, right? I'm gonna Rusty.
So it's actually,
I did print out all the documents that we need to.
The
prepare.
resolutions and all those
And
things.
there's a lot of information that we need to get ready for the ground submission. Not that it would make a difference if we need that. I do need to bring up one other item in the renovation option. We meet all the criteria, except there's one criteria that they're right on the edge on, and that is, there is a criteria that your existing building renovation portion is at least 55% of the overall building. Now, the reason that that's there is so that you don't take a small building or take a building and demo 40% of it and then put a huge addition on. In our case, we're not even demoing. The only thing we're taking out is the portables. But when we look at the percentages, we don't meet that 55% criteria. You know, in my experience, that's something we can review with the state and get that taken care of, and that because that's not the intent of that regulation. The intent is not to have people demolish large portions of a building just to build more new square footage on and take advantage of the.
Yeah, and that's been my experience too, and we typically run into this when we are looking at smaller schools. Which this really is. And I don't mean
To us,
that
it's big.
just based on other towns that have much larger school buildings. That's kind of where that kind of comes into play.
What is a percentage?
We're at 49.8 or something.
48.86, is that?
No, that's the reimbursement. This
Oh,
is
okay.
the square footage of
Okay,
the renovated existing space versus the new space.
But they've approved buildings that have been in our
Yeah.
percentage. Okay, as long as there's been a precedent that we're not.
And you can, I
violating.
mean, it's such a minor item that you can always get a local rep to, propose it to be modified.
So I just heard from one of our other members. It looks like the building committee is unanimously recommending 1A. One, C1A, yes.
and I think looking from us, I mean, we haven't all said, I mean, we could all say it too, but I think our thoughts are around the same way, and I'm not thinking differently. I don't know, yeah, I know we have 3 board members online, Maura, Linda, or Amanda, if you guys have any questions or concerns on C1A.
I'm good.
One of the things I was working on the other day
I was
was
just gonna ask, yeah, go ahead.
what does the budget look like?
Yeah.
And so I took $41 million of the current budget. I increased it by 3% a year to 27-28 when this gets built. And I subtracted a little bit of debt service, but it's only like $30,000 or $40,000 a year, so it doesn't really get into the equation. So in 27-28, and I forgot the paper, you're looking at a budget of at 3% a year increase of about $46 to $47 million over the current 41. At that year, you drop the 2.9% for the closing of schools, so the budget goes back down by $2.9 million down to around $43 million. And then if you add the debt service, which is 35 million, it was about 2.4 or 2.24. I think Kim averaged it out to 2.4 for 10 years because it comes at different variables. So you basically bring it back up to about 45 million. So the budget impact of building this compared to staying what we're doing, not fixing anything, is less.
Correct.
And I think it's important for us as we begin to sell this thing is to show the budget impact, not just, they're voting for $75 million. They're gonna bond $35 million. But in terms of the budget, whether you use 3% or 1%, doesn't matter, you're still gonna be back to about a 2026 budget level, no matter what you do. And then you get to see that savings is actually
brought the whole thing down, and then the debt service fills in the gap, and you're not really gonna see much of a change. If we do nothing, we'll be up 3% plus whatever else breaks. And so I think there's a good story. We have to probably put it graphically out there as we go to meetings.
And I think that might cement the fact that, because we're basing that final number on a 10-year outlook. What you just said is that it's actually, in some ways, we'll see it the day the doors open.
Yeah.
And not waiting 10 years savings for
Yeah,
schools.
you're gonna see the savings in the first year that the school's open, because you're gonna shut the others down. Yeah,
Those will also be the years of your highest debt service too, and then that
Yeah.
falls too.
and then the debt service falls off too, so inflation is really our driving factor in our budget. And if we can get this building in, you can have a new building and it's not gonna have a significant impact on the budget compared to doing nothing.
Now, what tells the story better than a colorful 10-year graph?
Yeah,
And subsequently, we need to tell the story of better educational quality, better collaboration among teachers, children being all together, that all goes in the whole package. That's, thank you, Bob. That's really
and
good.
it's less expensive than what we're doing nothing.
Better
And
indoor air
consistency
quality.
to know that our buildings
And
are
another
not
thing
crumbling
is,
and they're turning
right
on,
now, if we were
systems are
gonna
working.
quote on fixing linemen, it would probably be about $12 million.
Yeah.
So
It was 7, so it's.
that's what I'm saying. It should be about 12 now.
So anyway, I think, you know, if we move ahead with this C1, we also need to move ahead with a story. And the story, you know, it looks pretty good to me.
We should
A
hit
story
it
that
from, we
makes sense,
should
but
hit
it
it
makes
from the
sense to
different
everybody.
categories.
I think that's what's important, is that a story that makes sense to everybody, and
Yeah.
it's not just numbers and. I think we lose a lot of people when we start throwing numbers out and debt servicing complicated graphs. We really just need to get.
It's a
on
pretty
the
simple
level.
graph. It could be like one
Yep.
line.
But it is that story that touches base on the financial, the quality of the facility,
Yeah.
the quality of the education. Just hit, and I think it hits on all three.
And
And if
consistency
we
of
do-
everyone.
The
being
do
together
nothing
from the
option
beginning.
would be a lot of unknowns as well, as we mentioned earlier, unforeseen circumstances that Eric will have to deal with.
And the added risk.
But in reality, if something went out line, we probably have to move kids into the high school.
I have to say, so it
Oh,
seems
yeah,
like
they
our
already do that
recommendation from the joint from building and from the board would be to move forward with C1A. And start looking at, you know, some of the mandates, make sure we're keeping in check with the evening stuff. I don't know, Kim, if you wanted to touch base on some stuff, maybe we'll come back with the board when we come back with this with financials.
Yeah, I mean, I have.
It goes kind of along lines with what Bob
It's
said.
this big, so, and I would like to, you know, maybe
Yeah.
work
I-
with
I
a couple of board
think
members.
we
who
need
are
to
gonna
work
get
on like
it
a-
here.
on something that does it, but I think what you're trying to say too is not make it so technical and that you have to have an engineering degree or a finance degree to understand it, or it'll work for some people, but for other people, they'll kind of get lost in it.
Right.
But we don't want to make it so simplified that the engineers and those people will say, you haven't shown us any numbers. So maybe it's both.
Well, I was
Yeah.
talking to a family and a family from Durham, and they had said, well, like, what if you told the story of my family and how it's gonna affect my family based on having 4 kids? Like, run through it and say, what's the cost savings to my family? What's the cost savings to towns? What it's gonna do to improve my kids they're all gonna be in K-5 between now and 2028. You know, I think that if we can do that and explain where families are gonna be and what it's gonna do to benefit our families, I think is what's really important. And how it's just flatly going to benefit the taxpayers. You're talking about so many families in both these towns that don't have any tie to the school other than, you know, when they're involved with grandkids or.
We also have to convince people that we're just not voting for 75 million or 35 million.
Yep.
And,
But we're
and
voting for a financial. scheme.
once we have the number that we're gonna move forward with, then I can work with the town finance directors and get a mill rate impact. Right now, I really can't, and it'll be an estimate, right? It'll be their best estimate, but if someone's looking for a mill rate, I can work with them on that.
Do we feel that the April 3rd meeting is enough time? Do we want to call something from the board earlier than that?
To have that,
We had a
right?
consensus, so we have a vote on C1, okay,
You have a meeting next week, though.
That's what I was kind of
at
asking.
budget.
Sooner the better.
I just
Well,
think
I
April
didn't
13th
know if
really
that, I
like-
didn't know if that week mattered.
Well, we can still prepare everything even without that vote, 'cause we're not spending anything towards it, but I do think I would like to see a consensus from the board and a vote from the board before April 3rd. We can revise the work session.
I think we would have to
I mean,
make it a separate called meeting.
deal,
Whether
it's.
We could do it a half hour before our budget, if we wanted to.
Yeah, Kansas City, but now we're shortening it to 20 minutes.
I keep shortening for student achievement, I know.
We
We can figure it out.
Sorry, I didn't understand. So the third is okay, or is that?
Yeah, NHS is that night
Okay,
at 7 o'clock.
I think it's more about when you want to set your referendum date and how does that work in backwards?
Yeah, we're actually.
Let's just call a special
So that
meeting.
might be okay.
that's what I'm saying, yeah.
Whenever, tomorrow, it's okay.
It could be
So-
virtual.
Yeah, we can just do a virtual, we've done it with, we even did it with the evaluation, so I think we can do that. So we'll work with Doug to find a virtual special meeting, be able to call that, just to be able to settle that and head it out.
Yeah.
Right, okay.
A couple things that I just want to make sure that we're all clear on. Because it hasn't been mentioned tonight, but him and I talked about it today. I think it was today. And it might be part of our story as well. And again, people like new schools. I like new schools too, but another thing that supports this option, I think, is some of the very recent work that's been done on that campus. You know, we just recently replaced the roof and some of those things, and the hope is that those things are all retained and should be. I think that would be a no-brainer moving forward. The other is just the story that shouldn't get lost that Rusty shared a while ago, but we're moving and looking at 27, 28, and that is what's going to happen to the children when this site is unoccupied. And so there'll be some people out there who will say, my children are only going to be shuffled around for a few years. Then they're going to be in 5th grade or 6th grade. And it's actually the children coming up through the system that benefit. And that's 100% true.
Yeah.
So we have to, I think, hear those folks and try to convince them that we're looking at the long term here, something that is 20, 30, 40 years going to benefit this community. But if you're that parent, it might be hard for you to support this based on where your own kids are.
Well,
The
they're gonna,
pickleball courts are not going away. They're there. That was a recent improvement
And the
that
locker
appeals to
rooms.
the 65 and older crowd.
they are gonna benefit though, because the high school suffers when Lyman needs a new furnace. You know, there's one budget.
That's exactly.
So we can invest more money in all of the programs when we're spending less money
Exactly.
repairing infrastructure.
Your capital improvement starts being used in other places such as here and Strong and
Places
the
that actually,
concentration at that
they're
point. doesn't-
used to improve as opposed to
Exactly.
maintain. Right now, our capital improvements are used to maintain.
Mhm.
We're not improving. All right,
Derek's life.
before I ask for a motion to adjourn, do we have any public comment in the room? Kevin, you look like you're pondering and public comment. Paul? No? Okay. Are there anyone online that wishes to speak? You can raise your hand or just unmute.
What you're hearing is that microphone.
Yeah, I don't see any. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Move second. Second by Bob. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all very much. Thank you all
Everyone,
for
there's
coming.
the senior versus junior volleyball game.
Yeah.
I encourage all of you to